button, hold the red light on. Looks like we're live already. So welcome to the Friday Transportation Seminar. My name is Chris Monsier. I'm a faculty member in Civil and Environmental Engineering, and together with my colleagues, we co-organized this Friday Transportation Seminar. We're very pleased today to have Joel McCarroll. He's the Region 4 ODOT Traffic Manager, to talk about his experience at the American Association for State Highway and Transportation Officials. He was one of 2 fellows last year in Washington, D.C., so we're very pleased to have Joel give his perspective. So,
all right, thanks, Chris. Let me know if I'm too loud, too quiet. Don't do a ton of public speaking, so just give me any feedback and interrupt me with questions at any time. A little background on myself. PSU, MBA graduate, class of '97. So I've been with ODOT for 18 years. Spent almost 10 years in the Portland metro area in project development, traffic engineering, and maintenance and operations. I spent a good bit of my time at our facility down at on Flanders Street near the Chinese Gardens, and then some time up at our maintenance office up by the zoo there. In the last 8 years, or nearly 8 years, I've been in Bend, except for the year I spent in Washington, D.C. Excuse me. AASHTO, for the last 8 years, has had a fellowship program where they bring in a person or persons from the different state DOTs to work for them for a year. They realize a benefit by getting sort of the real-world user experience into their program, and then the state DOTs benefit by that person going back and having exposure to national policy level stuff back in their agency. So thought I'd start out with kind of what is AASHTO and what it does. Many of you are probably not that familiar with it, and then talk about some kind of major things that are going on AASHTO and by default nationally, and then kind of get into some of my own experiences. So with that, I'll get started. So what is AASHTO? It's a nonprofit association. It was founded in 1914. When it was originally founded, it was the American Association of State Highway Officials. It's been broadened to include highway and transportation officials, and I think that change happened in the late 70s, early 80s. It includes all 50 states. D.C. and Puerto Rico are also members, and for transportation purposes in like the federal legislation, D.C. and Puerto Rico are treated as states. There's also 35 associate members, like toll authorities, federal, Western federal lands, those kinds of things, and some larger local agencies. And it covers all the modes, so highways, transit, water, air, and rail. So AASHTO's vision to be the voice of transportation and a catalyst for organizational and technical excellence. So trying to provide the best technical information, research to the members, but also help them improve their governance structure, their ability to deliver on projects, manage people, that sort of stuff. So the mission: advocate for effective national transportation related policies, provide timely information on policy to Congress, executive branch, Federal Highway Administration, U.S. DOT, and then flow through, expand best practices to all the members. So if one state is doing something well, try to sort of get other states to see that, how they implement it, and so they can improve their practices. And provide technical service, develop technical guidance, design standards for all kinds of things. Develop and license software. Most states use some or all of AASHTO, whereas AASHTO develops software. Publications, centers of excellence in laboratory and product assessments. AASHTO has about 60 staff, but a couple thousand volunteers, and those volunteers come mostly from the state agencies, state DOTs, but there's also several from local agencies and toll authorities, things like that. So we have committees that cover all the modes, and then several that are specific towards topic areas. And I primarily worked with highways, and I won't read them all because you can, but So the committee structure is kind of like this. Oops. The board of directors is made up of the CEOs from each DOT. So Matt Garrett, the director of the Oregon DOT, is on the AASHTO board. There's 11 standing committees, and there they are. And for my purposes, highways, standing committee on highways is what we work closely with. And there's several subcommittees. There's 9 of those. And I work primarily with traffic engineering, systems operations and management. And then I also worked quite a bit on safety. So the primary technical activities for the Standing Committee on Highways is development of technical guidance, and the big thing is the Green Book, a policy on geometric design of highways and streets. AASHTO, which is the software, materials reference lab, which is a lab that goes around and certifies. If you're testing concrete on a federal aid highway project, that concrete tests have to go through a certified lab. AASHTO does the certification for those. Technology implementation group, and that's basically a way for states to engage in peer exchanges and improve the technology and best practices. And National Transportation Product Evaluation Program, which states band together to test products as a group rather than having to qualify products individually. So it's a savings for vendors. They have to qualify a product one time rather than going down to individual states. Savings for the agency. They don't have to test zillions of products. Other technical activities, National Cooperative Highway Research Program. Most NCHRP projects have a technical committee. Typically an AASHTO staff person acts as a liaison on the committee, but then also there's 2 or 3 people that are state DOT members are also on the technical panel too. Same thing on the Transit Cooperative Research Program, National 511 implementation, Snow and Ice Pool Fund Cooperative Program, LRFD deployment, those are bridge standards, frequency coordination for communication standards, ITS standards, TRACK, which is a recruitment program for middle and high school kids to get them to consider engineering as a career, and then some technical assistance programs. Policy development. AASHTO is what's called a 501c, so it can't lobby, but it can educate. So we'll testify on issues before Congress. We'll help DOT members because they're not typically experienced in getting up before Congress. We'll help them with their testimony and get them scored away. And coordination with congressional staff, consensus building with other transportation organizations, and that could be other associations, AMPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, AAA's Traffic Safety Group, you name it. We work with a wide variety of organizations. We also do communications, media relations, and then we send out regular newsletters. AASHTO Journal is weekly, where we sort of consolidate transportation issues from around the country, and regulatory monitors. So we track the Federal Register to alert the members if there's something in the register that could affect them and coordinate responses to stuff in the Federal Register. And then we have a web page and a marketing campaign. Are we there yet? And that's geared towards the new federal transportation legislation, trying to gear up and make the case that we need additional funding nationally for transportation infrastructure, and then transportation TV, and that's online videos to support the marketing campaign. So I worked in the Division of Engineering and Technical Services, which primarily supports the Standing Committee on Highways and AASHTO. So these are the people in my group. Tony Kane managed this group, and before he came to AASHTO, he was Executive Director of the Federal Highway Administration, which is the top non-political appointee, and then Ken Kabetsky, who spent 30 years as the West Virginia State Traffic Engineer, was kind of my direct supervisor. And that's me, and Priscilla Benavides from New Mexico DOT. We were the 2 engineering fellows in 2008, 2009. So I kind of covered this. So what do we do? Help committees develop technical publications, research proposals, work plans, coordinate between committees on cross-cutting issues, and manage several technical service programs, and assist with legislative policy development. So the Standing Committee on Highways, I mentioned, it had 9 subcommittees, and then each of those subcommittees would have various work groups underneath it who would look at specific issues, develop research proposals on things that were specific to that subcommittee, or address issues, you know, that group decided, you know, were of national focus. So development of technical guidance, you know, so we have on those 9 subcommittees and all the task groups underneath them, there's over 2,000 volunteers and in 200 committees. So each of those groups are charged with coming up with guidelines for issues that they want to work on. And you can see some of the products. And so that's the latest version of the Green Book, a guide for a policy on geometric design of policy, highways and streets, which is the one that's probably used most often. But there are several others that are more specific, don't have a wider range, but they're still as important for the technical folks that use them. Other technical activities, AASHTO generates about $25 million in income from the licensing fees. And then NetPEP, which the product evaluation program, which I talked about before. The reference lab, and I never actually worked with any of those people. They're at a different facility out in Gaithersburg, and they travel around and certify labs. Then technology implementation group, which, you know, identifies products or processes that will, you know, yield significant benefits, and then tries to kind of expand the use of those. And that's kind of how I got involved in AASHTO through a road safety audit TIG. So I went to Charleston, South Carolina for a conference, and which presentations from several of the states that were aggressively implementing road safety audits, and brought that back to Oregon, and now we're trying to get together a program on road safety audits. So AASHTO is basically pool fund software development. So we'll either develop software on our own, or use something that a state has developed on by itself, and then try to make it so that more of the states can use it. And then so there's some of the products: transport, and there's bridge analysis and load rating software. And ODOT uses several of these, including the Pontus software. And so that's how the program is managed. I won't really get into that level of detail. One of the important things that AASHTO was working on while I was there was a new strategic plan. So why update the strategic plan? The old plan was 4 years old. Much of the work plan had been achieved, and then there was kind of new challenges on the horizon. The current plan, the 2005 plan, didn't address climate change. Clearly that's a big issue now. Accountability, and that's performance measurement, and then the crisis in the trust fund. We were spending it. The highway trust fund was being spent at levels that were not sustainable. Last fall, there had to be an infusion of general fund money into that trust fund. Same thing again this summer and fall. So that's got to be dealt with as part of the new legislation. So what went into the plan? They interviewed most of the state CEOs, several of the committee members. Survey findings: most of the plan is valid. Not surprising. Every state, their biggest issue is funding. They have more needs than they have dollars. Climate change and accountability, which were not addressed in the plan, were important issues. The membership of the association wanted to continue a strong focus on technical services, and management help. That the organizational excellence component was still important. So summary of the plan changes. One, going back to the Are We There Yet advertising campaign, wanted to develop a national campaign to focus on increasing funding levels for transportation. That was included. Safety is emphasized. AASHTO has developed, as well as several of the member states, a toward zero death vision with a goal of reducing fatal crashes by half in 20 years. And then the plan retains emphasis on technical services. Excuse me. Sure.
What's the difference between the towards zero death vision with a goal of reducing fatal crashes by half? Those seem to be not quite congruent with each other.
Well, I mean, it's a vision statement that we want a transportation system where nobody gets killed on it, all right? But we're at 37,000 deaths this year likely. So the odds of us getting to zero, achieving the vision in, a specific time frame are pretty difficult. But so, you choose a goal that you think you can achieve. And with, current trends, bringing crashes down, increased funding, new research that's leading us to make better decisions about safety, we believe that's an achievable goal. Does that answer your question? Some other things: emergency response, congestion and operations, slight change in the language to talk about supporting national defense and improved disaster response, and also adding new language that creates a vision of a congestion-free America through multimodal system improvements and advanced technology and operations. So kind of get more specific on those goals. Also, a marketing campaign that deals primarily with the funding issue and trying to keep that front and center with policymakers. Accountability and performance is a big issue, and I'll talk a little bit more about it I'm going to talk about the House bill on transportation where it came up. And I think the important thing to take away from here is that the AASHTO members recognize the need to develop performance measures, but the states want to do it themselves and work cooperatively with the Federal Highway Administration and USDOT to advance those performance measures. That's probably something you should remember later. So new accountability language, so to promote accountability through performance-based management. Climate change, clearly a big issue and getting more important. So that was added. And I think the important thing here, and I sort of didn't recognize that, one of the big issues with climate change, clearly there's greenhouse gas issues and stuff, but a lot of states need guidance in adaptation. Coastal states, low-lying states, what sort of design year storms they're changing, what should they be designing to in some of their bridges and roadways. So obviously reducing VMT and greenhouse gases and all that stuff is important, but in a lot of cases for the members, not as important as figuring out how to keep their bridges in place. And that's the last point there is develop technical services for climate change mitigation and adaptation. Reauthorization, I just mentioned. This June-July timeframe, the House released its version of the new Surface Transportation Authorization Act. Came from the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee. It's gone through the subcommittee, and Representative DeFazio from Oregon is on that subcommittee. So it has $450 billion for the life of the bill program funding level, and that's significantly higher than it is today. Although some changes to it creates sort of new programs for metropolitan mobility, which in a change would direct the money rather than through the state DOT to a local agency, would be straight to the MPO, which is a big change in terms of how federal funding works and the pass-through and stuff like that. So it would be given increased authority essentially to the MPO in terms of planning and implementing work. Projects of national significance, those big projects that are not likely to be funded by individual states or multiple states, and you could think of the Columbia River crossing as potentially one of those projects. Additional funding for mass transit and highway and motor carrier safety. Currently, Safety Lieu, which is an authorization that we're acting under today, has something like 105 or 106 different funding buckets, so it consolidates or terminates 75 of those programs. So broader programs more flexibility for states and MPOs. Requires performance standards and establishes project-level accountability. When you read the bill, one of the interesting things it talked about, here's how much money you have, but there was X's in where that money was coming from. They have not identified the sources of the funding. It would need some sort of, either general fund support, increased gas tax, or some other funding source to fund these funding levels, and they're not defined. Go ahead.
A quick question. When you're talking about performance and project-level accountability, is that talking about questions of cost-effectiveness of implementation, or is it like forming failure standards for over budget, or what sort of accountability aspect?
It's probably some of both. I mean, some of it, they're broad performance standards, and the only performance standards that were really identified in the bill were around safety, where states would have specific targets for reducing fatal and serious injury crashes. So there's these broad performance measures that would cut across, the entire state, and then obviously on some of these mega projects, you'd probably, want something that we talked about benefit costs and, and much in the way that Oregon with the House Bill 2001, least cost planning and things like that. I don't know if the bill was that specific. I primarily focused on safety. And interestingly, no earmarks yet. And there's some focus on reducing earmarks, but I had a chance to hear Chairman Oberstar speak, and he doesn't necessarily think they're a bad thing. That allows the congressional representatives to more, I guess, adequately represent their constituents. So he doesn't refer to them as earmarks. I can't remember the term he used, but he doesn't consider them bad. Go ahead.
Does AASHTO look into, with respect to when they're trying to find different funding mechanisms, the impacts that like user fees would have on predominantly lower income folks, and educating on kind of the other approaches that may make it more equitable across socioeconomic spectrum?
Well, I think I don't know if they get into that level of detail, but I think they do look at different funding sources and don't necessarily, they look at what works for the states that have used them. So, for instance, if you looked at tolling, what level of traffic, what level of toll do you need to support, construction, how much subsidy, goes into it, those kinds of technical issues. I think that stuff, that you're addressing is kind of left to a broader level of, policy making. So concerns from AASHTO's perspective, I talked about money going straight to the MPOs rather than the states. So it emphasizes specific urban areas and does not let the individual states make specific funding decisions. So from an AASHTO's perspective, that is a change and not a good one for a lot of the state DOTs. Shifts funding away from capacity expansion. There was, much of the money was put into a capital asset infrastructure maintenance program, but again, it reduces the state's flexibility. Directs the US DOT to set the performance measures, and I talked about earlier that the states want to set those cooperatively with the US DOT. We don't want sort of one-size-fits-all measurements. For instance, if you have a goal around fatality reduction, specifically what will happen if you can get your legislature to implement a primary seatbelt law or a motorcycle helmet law. But if you can't get your legislature to do that, it's going to be very difficult to drive down fatalities. So being held to a performance standard that you cannot support because of specific circumstances in your state is kind of difficult. And then there were substantial reporting requirements beyond the performance measures that we didn't feel were going to be that productive. And then again, new authority of the MPOs at the expense of state DOTs. And the issue for MPOs is most of them are planning type organizations. They don't have sort of the structure and infrastructure to develop and deliver projects. Well, you're going to give them billions of dollars. You want to make sure that those organizations have that capacity before they go out and start spending money. Devil is in the details. Critical asset and investment funds can't be used for any capacity expansion during reconstruction. For instance, 50-year design life on a bridge, but this program would say you couldn't add capacity to that bridge while you built it. Projects that improve traffic flow are removed from the congestion mitigation and air quality program. In some cases, we've used those to improve signal operations or signal operations, through timing and coordination. Planning decisions change in how that could be done. The DOT, U.S. DOT, would establish mode share targets. Again, that's something that we feel is best done at the state level. Bicycle and pedestrian accommodation mandated on all federal aid highway projects. So it was not explained, what do you need to do if you're resurfacing a rural interstate? You need to provide some sort of pedestrian infrastructure. From a benefit cost standpoint, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So next steps, develop a list of critical issues to address at the political level, meet with key staff and kind of, do the education stuff, figure out the funding stuff, and then of course we have this, the issue with the trust fund, highway trust fund is running out of money and it needs continual infusions from the general fund to keep it supported, so it, has some urgency in developing the next authorization. This is kind of interesting. While I was there, I don't know how well you can see that slide, AASHTO, in conjunction with Adventure Cycling Association, developed a system, national bike route system, which are a series of essentially interstate routes for bikes, and includes, way up there, the one that goes through Eugene and is labeled 76. That's the route of the bicentennial that Adventure Cycling developed, for the bicentennial in 76. And there are several others, including a north-south route that through Oregon primarily follows US 395. So this allows states to work cooperatively, to encourage bike tourism, sign routes that would be consistent from state to state. So what did I do? Go ahead.
With those bike routes, are they planning to accommodate like wider lanes for the bikes on them, or are they just going to leave them as is?
Well, I think that's going to be an individual state decision about what's an appropriate. There was some concern. You've shown a route over a facility, and they're really broadly defined. Those are not tied to specific roads. Although, like for the bicentennial, there is a route that follows, for the most part, US 26 through the state.
Well, and I know from just driving on them that some of those are pretty narrow. So.
Yeah. So. And so that's going to be an individual state decision about, one, where they want to locate it, because you could locate it on an off-system route with either less traffic or a better facility, or you can choose not to mark the route until you have it to a level that you feel is, appropriate to be recommending to a bicyclist. So there's pretty broad discretion about when and where, you locate the route and how you, and then you don't even have to sign it, but you can. So, but what you would want to avoid is one state having it signed and then dumping you into another state that didn't tell you where you needed to be. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to make a sort of a general comment on policy versus reality. As a working traffic engineer, my job is to look at policy decisions and then any time I get a chance on the ground, make the ground look more like the policy. But often that doesn't get to happen because it isn't time yet.
Yeah.
However, if there isn't policy there to lead me, then I don't have a chance at making things look more like what they're supposed to. So just remember that this stuff the federal stuff is real high level guidance.
Yeah, and a state could use this as a framework for making decisions about how it's going to spend its money, either whether it's enhancement funds that are specifically directed to, those kinds of projects, or whether it's going to spend if it's general funding to make those kind of improvements. So, I mean, the state can use that as sort of a route map. So, hopefully I got your question. Yeah. I'm sure there's some roads that you would not want to ride a bike on right now. But, so what did I do? I worked primarily with the Standing Committee on Highway Traffic Safety and its Safety Management Subcommittee, the Subcommittee on Traffic Engineering, Systems Operations and Management, and several different national cooperative highway research projects. So in terms of safety, the big things that I worked on with Highway Safety Manual, and it's probably the most important thing that I've worked on, and not just because Chris is working on it too. It's, I think, going to be a big change in terms of how we practice traffic engineering. Sort of this axiom is you get what you measure. This gives us a better opportunity to measure safety. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. National Strategic Highway Safety Plan, which was, it's in process now. It's sort of a broad roll-up of all the state strategic highway safety plans. So, looking at some guiding principles in terms of highway safety that would, nationally. Safe Routes to School guidebook. So a guidebook for each state has a Safe Routes to School coordinator, sort of a guidebook about best practices in terms of implementing Safe Routes to School. A peer exchange on strategic highway safety plan implementation. We brought 3 people from each state together in Chicago and had a series of facilitated discussions about how to more effectively develop and implement strategic highway safety plans. A CEO Safety Leadership Forum at our Board of Directors meeting in the spring. We had a session where we brought all the CEOs together and gave them time to talk about what was working or wasn't working in their states in terms of safety. And so kind of emphasize that executive level emphasis on safety and development of common legislative positions for the state safety partners. And the state safety partners are AASHTO, Governor's Highway Safety Association, AMVA, Motor Vehicle Administration, Motor Vehicle Administrators, Commercial Vehicle Safety Association, and I think I'm forgetting one other. Emergency Management Association, and the International Association of Chiefs of Police. So that's all the state, the head of the state police organizations. Brought the national groups together, and because they all have what they want to do from a legislative perspective, and just kind of pull together, what are our common positions. And number one was the zero fatality vision with the reducing fatalities by half in 20 years. All those groups had adopted that. Not all the same exact language, but pretty similar. So identifying those positions we're all in agreement, putting that in a position paper. And then I think that carries more weight in Congress when you have, 5 or 6 different national organizations saying, in terms of safety, this is stuff we all believe. And it's, I think, a more effective message. So I'll talk a little bit more about the Highway Safety Manual. So what is it? It's a document akin to the Highway Capacity Manual, which is sort of, what a traffic engineer uses to define, what's the effect of adding a lane to a highway or installing a traffic signal, how much traffic can you move through there. It gives you a number of analysis tools. We don't have that for safety, and this is a way to get us there. And it talks about nominal safety, which would be like meeting the standards in the Green Book, versus actual safety. So trying to get a predictive methodology that tells you how many crashes you're likely to see on a section of highway. And this is just sort of another way to represent that. And so this is the real world curve on how things work. And then so it's taken 10 years to get there. It's been started in terms of research in the late 90s. And now we're getting ready to implement it. It's been balloted by several members. There's 3 different subcommittees that it's been balloted by at AASHTO. It has 2 committees, Standing Committee on Highways and Highway Traffic Safety, that need to ballot it. And then it'll be an official AASHTO document, and then states will individually decide to adopt it or not. But it also will publish it and make it available, and anybody in the profession can use the tools in it. And we will continue to work with the Transportation Research Board through the NCHRP program to continue updating it and getting funding and additional research, so it's a living document. So what's in it? Human factors and traffic safety fundamentals, roadway safety management process, so giving states tools or other local jurisdictions to look at their whole road network, predictive methods to tell you if I do some improvement, put in concrete median barrier, for instance, how many crashes am I going to reduce, and then crash modification factors. So that's just a listing of different treatments, what effect they have. Who should use the Highway Safety Manual? Everybody in the business, right? I mean, if you're planning, implementing, or operating the system, there's something in there for you. So there's the implementation schedule. This is a little old slide, but so going through the last balloting process and hope to have it released in the early part of next year. Subcommittee on Traffic Engineering, a big thing that group is focused on currently is the update of the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. That's supposed to come out at the end of this year, maybe, and it may come out as another. It's a Federal Highway Administration document. It comes out in sort of as federal rulemaking. They may put it out as another sort of draft and ask for additional comment they haven't said. So we worked. Each state had comments. We kind of tried to collate those comments and focus on the ones that we thought were most important with Federal Highway Administration, and provide alternative language that we thought would work. As they move towards publishing the manual. Worked on an NCHRP project that's ongoing right now to provide national standards on clearance intervals, red and yellow, all red and yellow times at a signal, in terms of providing a national standard. Currently, there's no real national standard on that, although there's some guidance, but there's nothing that's kind of accepted nationally. And then presented Oregon's work on flashing yellow arrows for left turns at traffic signals at the national meeting. Subcommittee on Systems Operation and Management. We worked a lot with a group that's called the Traffic Incident Management Coalition, which is developing a goal. It's called the National Unified Goal on Incident Management to provide sort of guidance on what's the best way to treat incidents, keep responders safe, and achieve quick clearance of incidents, because they are a major cause of congestion. Real-time System Management Information Program, Federal Highway Administration, Office of Operations came out with a rulemaking on which is required in Safety Lou in terms of real-time traveler information. So we got a subcommittee together of AASHTO members and drafted a response talking about our concerns of implementation timeframes, cost of implementation, and data requirements. U.S. DOT Research and Innovative Technology Administration, that's where Robertini works now, is developing a strategic plan for ITS research, development and deployment. So we worked with them on that and tried to, their sort of draft sort of focused on real transformational things, mostly infrastructure in the vehicles, and we tried to get them to take some steps, intermediate steps that would, or incremental steps that would talk about things that states could implement more quickly. So this is just interesting. This was the proposal for the Real-Time System Management Information Program. So it talked about, if you have to, in 2 years from the date of acceptance of the rule, you would need to update your road and weather information within 20 minutes of a change in an urban area, or both in urban and rural areas, as an example. And so we talked, our primary concerns is the ITS kind of infrastructure that you need to implement. The states just don't have the money to implement that in 2 years. Or roadway or lane blocking traffic incident information, same thing, outside of a metropolitan area is 20 minutes. It was not clear whether that was 20 minutes from the incident occurring or when you found out about it, because in rural Oregon, we just had a crash on Highway 20. We didn't get anybody on the scene. It took 40 minutes to get somebody on scene to even assess what the crash is about and what, that we could provide information that we knew was factual. So that, some real challenges there. The goal is good. It was just, how do you implement it cost effectively? I also worked on some design stuff. AASHTO is in the process of developing a guide for design of transit facilities, HOV lanes, bus facilities, light rail facilities, on streets. So it's transit companion to the AASHTO Green Book. Worked on the update for the roadside design guide. And then worked as part of a review team, or as an ITE project, Institute of Traffic Engineers, rather unwieldy name, context-sensitive solutions in designing major urban thoroughfares for walkable communities. Sort of focuses on the flexibility you have within the Green Book to design something, for instance, I don't know which side of the building we're on, 6th Street would be a good example. You want to really focus on those elements where you have flexibility in terms of making trade-offs versus vehicles, for pedestrians, transit facilities, in terms of making the street function for everybody. So that's what that book was for. It was an interesting process. It's been in development for several years. And oops, what did I do? I think it's locked up. Also worked some with the National Transportation Safety Board. That's the federal agency that investigates major transportation crashes. I mean, I think they investigate every airline crash, but they also investigate stuff that happens on the roadway. And the big one that they were releasing their findings on was the I-35W bridge collapse in Minneapolis. And so they made recommendations in terms of how states did bridge inspections for the specific types of bridges and load rating on those bridges, and then recommendation for increased oversight of outsourced design. So what we would do is take those recommendations and then weave them into existing policy documents that we have provided, or technical service documents that we publish, and so that they would incorporate the sort of the latest and greatest. Although sometimes you provide a little pushback in terms of the recommendations. We don't have to adopt them, and there's many that we have not. And then a Mexican Hat, Utah bus crash, which a couple years ago, bus overturned in a snowstorm. Mexican Hat is kind of in the Four Corners area. Overturned, peeled the roof off, killed 8 people, I think. It took several hours to get rescue personnel on scene because, one, there was no cell coverage in the area, and then the responders had to come from a long way away. So they had 2 recommendations that we're working on implementing. One was improving rural EMS communication, that there's likely a state highway safety responsibility because sort of that golden hour effect. If you can get somebody to emergency care within an hour, their chances of surviving are much greater. And then trying to identify the specific risks associated with charter bus travel, specifically in rural areas. Trying to identify how much of a problem of that, because there's no data on it, and that was of concern to them. And I don't know how we'll get at that. I think it would require sort of individual interviews with charter bus companies, because there's no way to really to figure it out. So now I just have some pictures if we have time. So this is sort of the multimodal part of the presentation. I took this picture when I first got there. About a couple weeks after I got there, there was this event called Bike DC. They closed several streets. You started out near the Reagan office building, which is a couple blocks from the White House, and you rode west up Embassy Row and kind of back and then past the Capitol and around RFK Stadium. That's the Embassy of Zambia. I tried to take a picture of the Embassy of Azerbaijan, so A to Z, but I couldn't find it. This is the towpath for the C&O Canal, Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. It was a canal that was similar to the Erie Canal, was designed to get goods from the interior of the United States, at that time west of the Cumberland Gap, to the Chesapeake Bay. They got it done right in time for the railroads, so they went out of business. But it's a great bike. It's a great bike path. This is another view in Georgetown. That's the little blonde kid in the front is my son Ryan. The portion of the canal in Georgetown still has water in it, and they run boats on it. And they are the original boats that are pulled by mules. So you travel at about 1.5 miles an hour. This is my other son, Sean. He's on his tag-along, and we are on the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, or the new Woodrow Wilson Bridge, which is the bridge that takes 495 over the Potomac River, sort of south and east of the city. On the left is Alexandria, and we're near the spot where Virginia, Maryland, and D.C., they all come together in a single point. So it's a beautiful bike path, great ride, although somewhat loud next to I-495. That's a train display at the Botanic Gardens. They have a wonderful Christmas display, and 2 2-year-olds think it's great. That's the inside of a railroad post office. When they delivered mail, before their elaborate system of trucking, they would sort the mail on the railroad car while it was moving. So each of those slots represent a specific city or post office. And this is in the U.S. Postal Museum, which is just across the street from Union Station, the main train station. And you would think that a postal museum wouldn't be that interesting, but it was pretty cool. It's a good museum when they have a space shuttle. That is the Udvar Hazy annex to the Air and Space Museum, and it's out at Dulles International Airport. And it's an enormous hangar with an incredible array of aircraft, including a space shuttle. That is the tidal basin in Cherry Blossom. And this picture doesn't do it justice, but it's as beautiful as people say, and if you get a chance, go. So I put this in here because there's paddle boats in the foreground. That's the Jefferson Memorial. On the other side of the tidal basin, this picture was taken from a moving duck boat, one of those amphibious boats at about 35 miles an hour. Took us over the 14th Street Bridge and down to the Potomac on the Virginia side by the airport, and then we went around the river a little bit. And sometimes with little boys, it's just fun to ride the metro around. And this is just some other pictures. Obviously Lincoln Memorial. This is the Capitol from the Washington Monument. Can't go to D.C. without the pandas. This is my children in front of Ben's Chili Bowl, which is a landmark Washington, D.C. restaurant. Kind of a funny story. I guess the Ali family owns it. Everybody would come in and tell, the person working the counter that one of the members of the Ali family told them they could get comped a meal. So the sign on the door said, "Only Bill Cosby eats for free." After the election, it changed to "Only Bill Cosby and the Obamas eat for free." This is the National Building Museum, and it's a beautiful building. And went to kind of a weird, they had a special exhibit on the architecture of Danish rest areas and roadside visitor facilities, which were amazing. Norwegian. So they have invested quite a bit in there. That's the 9/11 Memorial, the Pentagon in the background, and that just opened up while we were there. This is the Christmas display at the Botanic Gardens. So it's that's a scale model of the Supreme Court built out of organic material. What's impressive is that it's got all the major buildings laid out. So the building is to scale, but then you can barely see in the background is the Capitol. So it's also in scale distance from the Supreme Court. So they have all the major buildings and monuments built to scale and then laid out to scale. So it's a pretty impressive Christmas display. That's my son. We went to Wizards game when they're playing the Trailblazers, and he tried his best to get on television. That's my wife, and that's Mount Vernon, George Washington's home. And if you're the father of the country, you get pretty good riverfront property. That's the Potomac. That's the reflecting pool at the World War II Memorial. That's my son and his cousin. That is the site of Cemetery Ridge at Gettysburg. Gettysburg is only about an hour and a half from Washington, D.C., so that was the location of Pickett's Charge. We were fortunate enough to go there on 4th of July weekend, which is the actual weekend of the battle, and they had a reenactment going on. That's Monticello, Jefferson's estate, and an amazing place. Got to meet Mike Ditka when I was in a conference in Chicago. Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln have their own memorials. Teddy Roosevelt has his own island. That's the Roosevelt Monument, and it's on Roosevelt Island in the Potomac. And pretty much the only one you can bring your dog to. These are some of the original columns from the U.S. Capitol before it was reconstructed, and they're sort of just parked out at the National Arboretum. So it's kind of an interesting display. We were lucky enough to go to the inaugural parade. We left our house in Silver Spring, which is just over the line in Maryland, at 6:30 in the morning. By the time we made it downtown and through security, it was probably 1 in the afternoon. We listened to the actual inauguration on a handheld radio while we were waiting in line. This picture is of the sniper on the rooftop near where we're standing. So there was plenty of security, and it was pretty obvious. And so the next picture is the last one. We were standing at 6th in Pennsylvania, which is where the Navy Memorial is, right across the street from the National Archive. And I was thinking it was cold, I was miserable, and we weren't going to see a lot when Obama's limousine came by us with his tinted windows. But there he is in the black overcoat, and that's Michelle. He got out right in front of us, and I was about 4 rows back and just reaching up and taking a picture, and it's blurry, you can't see it, but I think it's the best picture I've ever taken. So with that, I'll take questions.
I was curious, with so many different groups and committees, et cetera, how it is minimized the turf wars and the waste and the overlapping and all of that. Any ideas?
Well, and that's a lot of what the AASHTO staff has to do, is to sort of identify, if some committee is working, if committee over here is working on something, either try to integrate it, sort of develop a task force that would cut across committees. And so that, that's one way to handle it. When you're dealing with volunteers, for the most part, they don't have a lot of time to waste with that stuff, so you don't get a lot of that. I mean, for the most part, the people that volunteer, I mean, they're doing it in the spirit of things, and so they want to get stuff done. So you don't necessarily have that bureaucratic infighting because they don't have the time for it. So there's some of it, but it wasn't too bad. But coordination is a constant challenge, and it's with only 5 or 6 staff in the engineering group, it's a lot to keep track of. So. And the red?
You said that AASHTO is not a lobbying organization, but do you have an opinion, or does AASHTO have an opinion on things like the gas tax or mileage taxes as funding sources for the reauthorization?
Certainly they're advocating for an increase in funding. I don't know whether they actually took a position on whether the gas tax should be increased, and if so, how much. Because the board is made up of directors, and the board would ultimately decide what the positions are, the policy positions. Because they represent specific states, and there's specific political issues in different states. It would be very hard to say, we support, a 10 cent a gallon gas tax increase in the federal highway gas tax, if your governor in your home state was advocating that there was no need to increase the gas tax. So you have to be very cognizant of the political situation in your home state. So oftentimes you don't get into that level of detail because everything is done. You need not just a simple majority. You need quorum. 33 or 34 of the members have to support any specific position. So sometimes for those specific things, it's pretty tough to get that sort of broad-based support. But I think there was, positionally, you would say that there was support for raising the federal gas tax and other funding sources. Brown right there, I guess?
I just have a question. Did you find it difficult to develop standard policies for the whole U.S. compared to, like, you work for UDOT or ODOT here, so was it kind of hard to develop standard policies for the whole U.S. as each state might have kind of their own problems?
Well, most stuff is not sort of policy. The technical stuff is almost all guidelines, and then it's up to the individual states to adopt it as policy or not. So on the technical standpoint, it was not that hard because each state, if you recognize that you had a problem with it in your own state, you could you could adopt a document except for, we have this concern with it or something. So it was not that difficult. But oftentimes there was, discussion about what a specific change meant. The roadside design guide was kind of a challenge in terms of, this very technical document, and different states interpret it differently. But for the most part, it was not a huge challenge. But you spend a long time working issues, and so it's a process. So, what?
Does AASHTO do any work or even think about the mega regional scale, specifically with regard to investing in national high-speed rail corridors?
Well, we had a rail group, we have a rail committee, because not every state has their own rail rail's not in each DOT, so to the extent that some states don't have a rail program other than rail crossings, some states aren't interested, but the rail group, they were working on some of that stuff. I don't know whether we actually took a specific position on a high-speed rail. Some of the states and some of the groups of states were very interested in working together on a lot of that stuff, but we don't know that we took a position on it. Back there?
I was wondering, when you were talking about the different legislation you guys were looking over, I was wondering, and you mentioned how the most recent legislation wants to give a lot more money to regional MPOs, and I'm wondering how exactly that came about, and if there's some kind of MPO lobby group, or who came up with that, or why exactly they want to do it that way.
There is an association of metropolitan planning organizations. So there is, and I don't know specifically what they were looking for legislatively. I'm sure that there's some perspective that some states do not focus on their metro regions or do not work closely enough with their MPOs in terms of planning and implementing projects, so that specific metropolitan mobility issues are not getting addressed. I'm certain that was sort of the driver. I don't know whose opinion that is. Well, clearly Chairman Overstar's, that's his opinion. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in the bill. But I don't know who else on the T&I committee, who else thinks that or why they think that. But it was an outcome in the bill.
There's one question from the web, and to what extent does AASHTO work with academics on things like research or planning, policy?
Yeah, certainly every, all the NCHRP stuff we have, and the technical committees, one of the NCHRP requirements is you have at least one academic person. And, for instance, the Highway Safety Manual, when AASHTO decided to, it was an NCHRP document, we decided that we wanted to make that an AASHTO document in towards, that would help keep it updated and facilitate its rollout. So much of the staff, or the research people, on the development of it are academics, although the PI was Beth Wemple from Kittleson. So and stuff like that, you're working closely with academic types on looking at the research and editing it and trying to get it to a document that you can roll out. So.
Great. So with that, I think we have reached our 1 o'clock mark. Before we thank our speaker, I want to put a plug in for next week. We have Professor Joan Walker from UC Berkeley. She's going to be talking about integrated transportation and land use modeling. Hope we see some of you there, and thank you very much.
Thank you. If you just Google it, I think Adventure Cycling has it on their website. Yeah, it was when I hunted around AASHTO's website.